My dad just calls me every time and asks me to talk to him for hours on end.
Does he want his classes?
He doesn't, he just calls me. It's easier to leave his house.
Surprising, you know, that friends retired, but they don't live in Virginia. They have a hard time finding places that they can classes. They have to pay tuition.
Oh, yeah, you do.
Virginia is a state law permits anyone over 60 classes. And if you live below, very low level, just classes for credit.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes, okay, thank you. Well, welcome everyone to this year's Jeffrey T. Chamberlain Memorial Lecture. This is an annual lecture series which was inaugurated in May of 2011 by the Department of Modern and Classical Languages to honor the legacy of Professor Jeff Chamberlain. Jeff actually began his career at Mason in 1983 as an assistant professor of French linguistics and Latin. His love of languages was legendary, ancient to modern, and he envisioned for Mason students to have language learning to be an integral part of their life. He was a wonderful teacher, scholar, and administrator, and until his untimely death in 2009, he taught French language and linguistics. He also served the department as a chair for 2 terms, and he was also very involved in university and community life. So tonight's Chamberlain lecture addresses how our knowledge of culture, literature, and languages has been transmitted to subsequent generations over time. For our modern university, with studies in multiple overlapping disciplines, this evening's lecture addresses not just language and classical studies, but also the cross-disciplinary innovations offered with engineering, forensic and computer science, astronomy, and technical fields. How much this is in the spirit of Jeff's legacy, we will now hear from Mary Bauer, who is already waiting patiently on the screen, as you can see. With her late husband, Jeff, Mary established an endowed fund to support our department. And she provides an annual gift to help support this annual lecture series. Sometime after Jeff's death, she established a separate endowed scholarship fund called Mary's Scholarship for Homelessness Advocacy. Mary has earned an MA from George Mason University, and currently she teaches at Aquinas College in Grand Rapids, and she also teaches remotely for Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut. So welcome, Mary. Thank you so much for joining us today, and the floor and the screen is all yours. Thank you.
There's a little bit of a delay, but I hope we'll be able to work through it. I would like to tell a story about Jeff that relates to the subject of the talk. So since we're talking about ancient artifacts, I thought it would be fun for you to hear about how Jeff found out his own ethnic heritage, which he didn't know. When I first met Jeff, he knew a lot about his mother's side of the family. And that was because, if you don't know, Jeff was a twin. And the parents had a very handy way of handling this. In the summer, they sent Jeff's twin to stay with the paternal grandparents. And Jeff would go to stay with his maternal grandparents. So he knew a lot about his mother's family and their whole lineage and all of that. But he didn't know very much at all about his father's side of the family. When I first met him, I asked him if his last name was British or French, because it could be either. And he had a lot of British blood on his mother's side of the family. His response was legendary, Jeff. He said, I don't know, I'm a mongrel. So it seems that he wasn't clued in so well. All he knew about his father's side of the family was his grandparents' name and his great-grandparents' name. And he also knew that he had a Native American female relative, name unknown, Native American tribe unknown. The family has a picture of her, but he didn't even know how much Native American blood he had. So before we were married, just before we were married, Jeff's grandma Violet died. She was his paternal grandmother. And bless his mother, both of the grannies lived with her. Her husband had died, her father-in-law had died. She nursed all these people through their life and death, and she had the two grannies with her. So after Jeff's granny died, we went up to inter her. She wanted to go back, or she wanted to be buried back in Indian Lake, which is where his father was raised. So Indian Lake, New York. And while we were at his mother's house, she said to Jeff, well, go in Grandma Violet's room and take whatever you want. The others have already taken what they want. So Jeff came out with photographs and the family Bible. That was all he wanted from Grandma Violet. After this was all over, we went back to Virginia, of course, and Jeff started going through the things that he had taken from his grandmother's room. The first clue that we found was on the back of a photograph. And this is my point about artifacts. It wasn't the usual way of finding genealogy. It was little hidden clues. The photograph was of his great-grandmother, who was called Grandma Daisy. But in fact, on the back of the photo, we found her real name, which is Angel Saint-Jean. So that was our first clue that Jeff indeed did have French blood. But we still didn't know about the Chamberlain name. Was that a French name or was it not? We kind of suspected because that part of New York has a lot of French blood, but we didn't know for certain. The next thing he found was a photograph of a man. There was no name on this one, but based on the way the man was dressed, his hairstyle, his mustache style, we could deduce that that was probably, and the striking resemblance to Jeff's father, we could deduce that that was probably great-grandfather Adolf. Great name, huh? Adolf. The picture itself didn't help us a lot, but it was in one of those cardboard folios. And the bottom of it was stamped with the name of the studio and the location, Woonsocket, Rhode Island, which I find interesting because Jeff was raised pretty much in the Great Lakes area. But when he was doing his master's degree, he said he felt the need to go back to New England. He did not go to Connecticut, which is where he used to summer, but he went to Rhode Island. He did his master's degree at University of Rhode Island. So I kind of wonder if there was some kind of pull there that he didn't even really know. Woonsocket is kind of a weird place. It is the headquarters of CBS. That doesn't help us much. But what we did find is that there is a very large French-Canadian enclave there. People from Quebec were recruited by the people who started up the textile mills in Woonsocket. They needed more labor, and they found that French-Canadian farmers were not doing so well because their families were getting bigger and bigger, and the land could no longer support them. So we could see that maybe Grandpa Adolf came from, well, we know that he was living in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. Didn't prove for sure that he was French, but it was kind of leaning in that direction. Last clue we got was the Bible. Now, many families, including my own, have on the inside page of the front page of the Bible a little page where they write the family, so-and-so married so-and-so and their child was so-and-so, but not Jeff's family. Of course, that would be too easy. Instead, it pays to read the Bible. I hope you will all become religious now. As Jeff was reading the Bible one day, he found a little newspaper clipping. It was only about, I would say this big. It was from the classified ads section, and it was an advertisement or a bakery that was for rent. The bakery was in Montreal, Canada, and the ad was written in French. We don't know for sure whether that was Jeff's great-grandfather thinking about going back to French Canada. We don't really know anything, but we do know now that Jeff indeed, Chamberlain, is a French name. So I thought it was interesting because Jeff, without knowing any of this, was drawn to the French language. He was drawn to Rhode Island, and he also wrote some papers about French Canadian literature, which he liked a whole lot. So I hope we'll hear some more about how to use the clues that are not quite so obvious.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Mary, for being here and sharing that with us from Jeff's personal life, and also how it probably connects to what we're going to hear about tonight. So thank you very much. Our speaker tonight is Michael Toth. As president of R.B. Toth Associates and an honorary research associate at University College London, Michael Toth is an international leader in the use of advanced imaging solutions for manuscript and cultural heritage studies around the globe. His work has taken him from St. Catherine's Monastery Library in the Sinai Desert to Abu Dhabi and Korea. It has also taken him to a variety of classes here at George Mason University as a senior audit student, from astronomy and engineering to art history and classics here in the department. Mike has applied his degree in history from Wake Forest University and its motto Pro Humanitate to 30 years of work in system engineering and program management that included launching space shuttles and developing advanced satellite programs and IT systems. He now leads teams of technical experts and scholars as they help make our previously unknown cultural heritage openly available for research online. He has just returned from the UK, where he led a workshop at the University of Leeds and imaged palimpsest and Lewis Carroll photos at Christ Church College, Oxford. R.B. Toth Associates LLC provides program management, systems integration, strategic planning, and technical support for archives, museums, universities, and libraries around the globe. They're currently collaborating with George Mason University on a National Endowment for the Humanities grant to develop methods for digitizing soldiers' graffiti found in Civil War buildings located nearby in Virginia and elsewhere. Michael Toth's presentation today is entitled Technology Reveals New Insights into Cultural Heritage and Linguistics. Please join me in welcoming Michael Toth.
Thank you, Francine. Thank you, Mary. It's good to be here. Actually, it's good to be here. And although I do enjoy my classes, I think this is payback for all the exams I've skipped as a senior audit student. We could bring the slides up and we can move forward. So I'm going to talk about the flow of knowledge, the flow of languages, and how we know what we know now. And how we're trying to recover some of what was lost. When I first was invited to give this lecture, first thing I did, of course, was look up Geoffrey Chamberlain. And as I look back at the various media that we'll discuss today, at papyrus and paper and parchment, not in that order, I had to reflect back on oral history. And as I looked in the catalog for Geoffrey Chamberlain, I came across his record collection here at George Mason University, where he has, I think it's 9 linear feet, 17 boxes of records, which 33 1/3, 45, 78, a broad range of records here at George Mason, which are a resource for students, whether it's jazz or just music itself. So that took me back to how has technology supported our knowledge of course, the first traditions of sharing language and of sharing knowledge were oral. We don't have, of course, recordings from Sumerian times or whatever, but some of the earliest recordings were on wax cylinders like these. And those wax cylinders, just like a current record, has grooves in it. And a needle would go through those grooves and pick up an analog signal from the vibration and provide sound with some amplification there. So the needle, of course, can do damage to the groove over time. And so these early wax cylinders are very fragile, very sensitive. At the University of Berkeley, they've developed a system by which they can use lasers. If you look at this, there's the wax cylinder. If we look at this end on, here's a wax cylinder, here's a laser firing down at that. And with the laser, we can pick up the signal from those grooves and convert those to sound waves. So with that, we have the use of optical technology, the laser, to give us audio from some of these early discs. I dare say Jeff Chamberlain's records are probably not as fragile and could probably use a needle, but should anything be that fragile, there are optical methods of recovering that information. This information is available at the Berkeley Library site. It's called Project Irene because one of the first wax cylinders was someone singing the song, something about Irene. So, but other than that, I won't go into the oral history, and I should point out this is not a project I worked on. I should also point out when Jeff Chamberlain started here in '83, I finished up as a summer school student from Wake Forest in '78, so I don't think we had an overlap there. But what I want to discuss this evening is the flow of information, the loss of information, and how we can perhaps regain that information, those languages, using technology. Starting with papyrus scrolls, early papyrus, those had to be rewritten because you roll them up, you'd unroll them, roll them up, unroll them every 100 years or so, you had to overwrite them. There was some loss there if you didn't write, not overwrite them, but rewrite them. So if you didn't rewrite them, you would lose something. Of course, we had Sumerian tablets and that type of thing beforehand, but we'll stick with the more recent media, the more portable media. So we have papyrus scrolls, then parchment came along, and the papyrus was then transcribed by monks and nuns onto the parchment. What didn't get transferred to the parchment may have been lost. Some of the papyrus was reused, some of the parchment was reused. Parchment was then printed after early printers, and then we had this broad dissemination of knowledge with paper books. And now we're at a digital period. Is there going to be loss as we turn to digital? Are digital methods going to help us recover some of this? So that's what we need to consider this evening, is this flow and how we can continue to use technology for our benefit and ensure we don't allow technology to serve as a source for loss of knowledge, loss of language, loss of information. So I'm going to be speaking about how we apply science and technology to gaining knowledge about objects, more about the language, more about what's contained in them. This is science. This is empirical. It's not magic. While this book had the recipe for how to make a basilisk in it, those of you who are Harry Potter fans, and it was overwritten or overprinted, this is not magic. We are using technology and science, and with apologies to John Dee and J.K. Rowling, we are not using the paranormal or anything. I do run into that actually when I'm in the Civil War houses. You see ghosts and stuff. We don't go there. So I'm not going to get too far into the technology here, okay, especially for humanists in the room. For those of you technologists on Zoom or on YouTube, I will offer as we move forward at the end, opportunity to earn up to $1 million. I'm serious about this with a project that's being sponsored by a collaborative team. My goal is to get us out of here by dinner time, as you can see from what I was writing up on the board at the Stanford Synchrotron. So we won't go too far into the technology. I should also point out, despite headlines you may see of early printed documents just got blasted with X-rays, we always test the amount of energy we are putting on an object, whether it's the light or it's X-rays. And no pages were harmed during these experiments. So starting at the beginning here, I want to talk about papyrus. Papyrus is, as you may know, a reedy plant. They cut layers of it and put them together into something like this, and you can pass these around. I'll be passing a couple things around. Please get them back to me. They get more valuable as we go along through the evening. So papyrus would be reused. Now, some of it just ended up in fragments, such as in Oxyrhynchus and kind of garbage dump of papyrus. Some of it was reused in cartonnage, in mummy masks during the Ptolemaic times, where you'd have papyrus mache, if you will, where you would have pieces of papyrus built into these mummy masks. And some, I'll loosely call them researchers, would melt these apart using, or take these apart by soaking them in palmolive detergent. Do not recommend that. So in part to try to counter that, to point out the damage they were doing to heritage, the Arcadia Fund asked us, working with University College London, if there was a method for non-destructive imaging of cartonnage, to be able to see just whether it's possible to see ink within these mummy masks. So we started with optical coherence tomography. And you might say, oh, that's brilliant because it uses infrared. It's used to look through things, and you're very smart to jump right on that. Actually, I'm not. My sister, to the left in the photo here, is the Wadsworth Professor of Ophthalmology and a retina specialist at Duke University, and happens to have a lab full of these devices. So nepotism works. She said, I'm trying to keep preemies from going blind, but you can have my lab for half a day. So that's why we jumped right on the OCT, optical coherence tomography. So with that, we could see a very small spatial area and see the different layers of papyrus, just as she would look for blood clots or something under a retina. So, but it's a very small spatial area. So then we went across to the biomedical engineering lab where they had a scanning OCT system. And so we put a piece of papyrus under that. And with that, we could you click play on this? I think there's we'll see if that, yes, please. And so with that, we could create a three-dimensional image of this very, very small piece of papyrus. And with that, we could cut layers, whether it's vertical or horizontal, and we could see the carbon ink that was within that papyrus. So this is a useful tool, but as I said, very, very small spatial area. So thank you. So this is the type of thing you could get. We then turned to X-ray coherent tomography. I showed this at National Geographic, and they said it looked like a bomb had gone off in this. But it's it's an experimental site. This is at Berkeley on their synchrotron, where they had micro CT, micro X-ray coherence tomography scanner there, which was used on the Herculaneum scrolls that were buried after Vesuvius blew up in 79 AD, which will bring us to that $1 million at the end of this discussion. So with this, we were able to get scans here again of a small spatial area. If we could click this. So here's a variety of technical systems. First, a basic photograph. This was just a test sample, then X-ray radiography, where you really can't see anything because carbon, you can't pick up the X-ray. But then when you do the tomography, you can see volumetrically, you can see the layers of papyrus, you can see the inks there. And so you can you can see the letters in the ink there. Now, the problem is, of course, this is just a small piece. Again, we have very small spatial area there. So we then turn to multispectral imaging, and I'll go into this in a little more detail. But at Duke, we set up a camera, a filter wheel, and lights that illuminate the object in what we can see with the human eye, as well as ultraviolet and infrared. And we had this piece of papyrus here, this piece here, Duke 716. It's a petition from 140 to 136 BC, sometime in that era. There's a thin layer of gesso up here that prevented the papyrologists from reading the text there. So with the multispectral imaging, we were able to penetrate that gesso and bring out the text there. It's got the papyrologists all excited. It says this of course is during the Ptolemaic period, so it's in Greek, it's not in hieroglyphics. This isn't, back in the Middle Kingdom or something. And this talked about some corruption related to the grain supplies in Egypt at that time, oddly enough, near Oxyrhynchus there. So, well, not oddly enough, because this fragment was part of that catch. So the Duke folks thought that was pretty awesome, or as my classics professor would say, is this amazing or what? They were quite pleased with the results there. Now, we could only get through a very thin layer of gesso. So could we get through the paint? Probably not. But it gave us a method of seeing what was there, where something's been taken apart from a cartonnage. So as far as the technology, so that's the papyrus. I've got some handouts here, happen to be left over on how to make the mummies talk. So as far as the technology we're using, we're actually borrowing from astronomy or earth science here. And if you look, there's been a lot of talk about the James Webb Space Telescope, and here's a picture of the galaxy. Before that, the Hubble Space Telescope, how they look in wavelengths, how they see, how they collect data in wavelengths beyond what we can see with the human eye. So we see in the visible, in the blues, the greens, yellow, red. They can see, especially the Hubble, down into the UV. The Webb is up in the IR for the redshift of astronomy. Also in the same way as Landsat. I saw Virginia Norwood, one of the pioneers in Landsat 1, just passed away, where flip it over and you're scanning the Earth and collecting all these wavelengths and understanding more about plant growth and death and crops and that type of thing. So what we're doing is this is Sir Isaac Newton's drawing of a rainbow on some Latin text there, up here. And he talks about the refraction of light, and how you take white light, you break it apart, and you get the different spectra. So we can take images with that and do processing and bring out different features in the images. So we use multiple wavelengths of light. We're only showing 12 here, starting down in the infrared, in the UV, just barely into the UV. Now you may say, well, UV, that's what gives you a sunburn. You're absolutely correct. But that's much further down here. That has a much higher energy level, around 200 nanometers. We're dealing just below 400 nanometers, 365 and 385 nanometers. And so what we have, and then up into the infrared at the other end. So we have these banks of lights with 16 different LEDs on them, a 100 megapixel camera and a filter wheel. And with that, we can shine the lights down on the object, they're reflected up. The filter wheel allows us to block the light and capture fluorescence, but we'll keep it simple here. And these are the wavelengths we're currently using, plus or minus about 10 nanometers. We've gone to a 400 nanometer instead of 410, right at the borderline. So we'll take a series of images of an object, and we'll capture that stack of usually about 25 images. What you're seeing here, they say they're JPEG. Our primary collection are TIFF images. Reason they're TIFFs is one, there's no compression, and two, we want to make sure these can be preserved and that in future someone will have, there's so many TIFF images out there that there will be a way of reading these images, just, like, so you won't need a Rosetta Stone, if you will, to figure out how to get the ones and zeros to give you an image. So you end up with a stack of images, each in a different wavelength, and then we can put those together. This is a portable system, if you call 55 pounds portable. I'm still recovering on my right shoulder from my trip to England, schlepping around all this gear, planes, trains, automobiles, boats. We carry it there. And it's proven very useful as just kind of a case study. This is in Vienna, in the Austrian National Library. I won't try to pronounce it in German. I suspect others in the room could. And for that reason, I won't try to pronounce it. So this is a Bible Moralissae, and as you can see, there's text here, but then there's very faint text in between these lines. And the question for the scholar, Catherine Takao, was who this was dedicated to. Does this give us more information about that? So we brought the system in. You can see the light panel here. Here's the camera up there. I think they had it mounted on a tripod because we were in a broom closet or something. We need a dark room. We don't want other wavelengths of light. I should point out we only have our lights on in there. Working with Dr. Bill Christiansberry, who is the pioneer in this type of narrowband multispectral imaging. As you'll see later, he came up with the idea for the lights. He's come up with a processing algorithm. So he's sitting with Catherine there trying to recover more information. And so these are the areas where we're trying to recover the text and able to bring out more of that text, which had been erased, and we think erased purposely. That gave Catherine enough, Dr. Takao, enough information to say, this was dedicated to a Danish king. And she's published this information in a journal. And I'm happy, drop me a note, I'm happy to share any of these links that I'll be putting up during my talk. So with that, with a portable system, even though bouncing it across the cobblestones of Vienna, we were able to do the imaging in situ and provide useful information. Now, we deal with a range of media. So we talked about papyrus, also dealing with parchment now. So information would be transferred from the papyrus on the parchment, which is pretty robust. Always careful when I do this. A friend of mine did this with an antiphonal. It just went in two pieces. So I won't pull too hard, but it's basically shoe leather. It's sheep, goat, or calf skin. Fairly robust. Keep it away from heat and moisture. And so these would be written on with iron gall ink. So this one's 14 something or other. It says there, someone with glasses on can read the date. And so you can pass these around. These are different levels. Anyway, so, and frequently what happens, now remember, there were scribes and nuns handwriting the text in iron gall ink. They would have a goose quill and they would have a knife and they would dip that in the inkwell. It was made from the crushed gall of oak trees and write on the text, sharpen their quill, try to erase mistakes by scraping with the knife. And these books were used over and over. You couldn't get extra copies unless you went back to the scriptorium and had them make some more. So you can see usually on the edges, you will see wear. You will see wear on the bottom corners. The front and back pages will either be worn or will have disappeared. Frequently, you'll have entire quires missing because these are bound up in a quire of folio, of bifolio, that are then stitched in the middle. So you end up with a lot of wear. There's marginalia here, and some of it is missing. This is Ovid's Metamorphoses from the 12th century. So with the multispectral imaging and processing, we were able to recover that text in the margin here. to provide more detail. Same with this bestiary. This is 13th century, possibly from a Cistercian nunnery. In this case, looking at the inks here and some of the damage. This is the processing tool Dr. Christiansberry developed. It's Image J. Those of you who are familiar with medical processing, it's a tool developed by the National Institutes of Health. So we've repurposed that from the very well-funded medical field, yet again, and applied it to the less well-funded humanities and cultural heritage field to be able to provide to bring out the greatest spectral response in an image using different colors. So we're able to take this around the world, work with globes and Shakespeare's first folio and space helmets, and I think that is a Sumerian scroll, and Asian scrolls and that type of thing. Now, parchment required, it was a byproduct of the slaughter of sheep's goats and calves. And so in some places, especially if you're in the middle of the desert, Mount Saba or St. Catherine's in the Sinai there, it was a precious commodity and there wasn't a lot of it. So they'd reuse it. And what they would do, you can see here that there's ink on the top that's been overwritten and there's ink on the bottom. So what they would do, with apologies to the editors of the Washington Post, is they would take a piece of parchment and they would scrub off the original ink, tear it in half. Sometimes they didn't tear it in half. And then, so you turn it 90 degrees, although sometimes it would be parallel. And then they would write new text across it, fold it up, and you have a palimpsest. Okay, so you have this text is the overtext. When I refer to this is the overtext, and this is the undertext. Sometimes it would be like that, and be in the same direction, which it is in this case, where it's parallel to the upper text. I have a pointer here. So your upper text, this is in St. Catherine's Monastery, Greek, New Finds, Majuscule Greek 2, Epistles of St. Paul, in Greek, going that way, Arabic, going that way. Now, if we use multispectral imaging to see what's underneath, then we can bring out this text, which is Greek, and it's a palimpsest. They would have a stack of these, a monk or nun would have a stack of these here. They would take it and they'd start writing. Next one, start writing. They may be from the same manuscript. They may be, and more likely, from multiple manuscripts. So in this case, 3 different manuscripts, 2/3 the events of the 5th century of St. John, Christendom, 4 leaves from the Appendix Holy Scripture, and then a bunch of other things. So you have these multiple texts in there, and you could, as I'll show you later on, you could have one that has a broad range of materials, anything from medical text to a religious text. So the history of digital imaging of these palimpsests really goes back to the Archimedes palimpsest, which was purchased at auction 29 October 1998. Purchased for $2 million plus the buyers or the commissions of $2.2 million. This was loaned to the Walters Art Museum to try to read the original works of Archimedes that have been copied onto this. Half of this is ox glue, easy to take, straightforward, nothing's easy. Straightforward to take apart. This is PVCA glue, needs a solvent to take it apart. But Abigail Quant was able to do it. We had 2 great scholars working on this, Nigel Wilson, wonderful Greek philologist, and Reviel Netz, who understood the ancient Greek mathematics. A great team. One understood the language, he understood the letters, he understood the grammar, he understood how the Greek should convey words. And Reviel understood what Archimedes was trying to say with regard to the mathematics and draw in the diagrams. So set this up under this was a team of scholars from RIT, from Xerox, from Johns Hopkins University, including Bill, who you saw, and with Abigail Quant, the conservator, able to bring out the undertext. Especially, remember I said these are bound as wires. Down in the gutter was very important. Remember, this had that PVCA glue on it. So Abigail had to be very careful in removing this information that could not be seen unless it was disbound. So we were able to recover information. You can see these run orthogonal to the upper text there. And during this project, and I said by God it was going to be done in 10 years because we were developing systems as we went along. This wasn't turnkey as we're doing now. Bill developed this method of using LED lights. The lights had advanced, computers had advanced, the cameras had advanced, the internet had advanced, so that we could use these lights to illuminate the object and then in the different wavelengths instead of turning them on manually and turning them off and making mistakes. So we got a lot of information from that, but then we had to go to another energy level, X-rays. And the reason we had to do that was because there were some forgeries on some of the pages. Now, we didn't do X-rays like if you broke an arm and you put that and the X-rays go through and you see the broken bone. They're X-ray fluorescence. I won't go into detail there, but if you take something like the Star Trek light gun, irradiate an object with a very low voltage X-ray, you will then get signals off of it, such as this is at the Folger Shakespeare Library. This book has some stains in it. And you can see, you can then identify the elements from the X-rays that fluoresce off the object. Sulfur, potassium, calcium, iron, nickel, copper. Iron is what is in the iron gall ink. So that can give us information. And if we take it to a powerful enough X-ray, such as the Stanford synchrotron, the Stanford synchrotron radiation light source to be exact, we can then run back and forth and collect information like this. Here's the scatter plot, here's potassium, here's iron, here's copper, calcium, zinc, and titanium. In this case, we're not getting much of the iron, but we've got a lot of the copper here. Zinc, titanium, this is not the Archimedes, this is a later one. So you can pull out these different elements and you can get the text that's in those. So we took the Archimedes out there, mounted in the stage, the beams coming this way, lower right to upper left. Got a detector here, detector there, detector back here, so we can collect the information. And we're able to see through these gold paint forgeries and get the original text of original copy of Archimedes' work. Little complicated because we actually had 5 layers here. Remember, they're X-rays. So we've got the forgery on the top. We have the upper text, which is the Euclidean Book of Prayer. We have the Archimedes text, and this is all on the recto side. On the verso, we have the Archimedes text and the Euclidean. So we've got these 5 layers. Fortunately, the scholars, Nigel and Reviel, were able to pick them apart. So I said 10 years. We made that by 8 hours because it was sold at auction at 2 p.m. and we had all the data up at 6 a.m. 10 years later on the 29th of October 2008. We had 2.4 terabytes of data, and these are all hosted now at University of Pennsylvania. You go to OPEN, there's all the data of this and other projects are available there, freely available. And part of that was to ensure we could preserve it, because we have the only copies on the method and the Stomachion, the earliest work of common metrics, the only copy in Greek of On Floating Bodies, and these other works. Now there's also, remember, I said a palimpsest is multiple works. So you have Hyperides, you have commentary on Aristotle, liturgical book, and 12 folios. We still don't know what they are. So I thought, okay, we're done, moved on to other projects. 9 years later, Reviel Net sends me a note saying, hey, it's inconceivable we do not do all in our power to excavate everything possible out of this page. Who's the, okay, excavations. So besides completing our method, a measurement circle provides us Stomachian frame. So he wants more imaging. Like, okay, go to the owner, say, hey, wants more imaging. Well, they've been encased at that point, still disbound, encased in hermetically sealed sleeves. So we had to take them apart with Vince Carney, who is a trained conservator. So Bill and I, my father's here looking down at it. This was on an early system, thus the gantry. We were able to get more information because now we're up to, I think at that point, it was a 64 megapixel camera. And with greater sensitivity, greater signal to noise ratio. Won't go into details of that now. One of these pages, as you can see, sphere and cylinder, it's running parallel to the text. So very, very difficult. It's the same spectral response basically of the upper text and the lower text. So you can't see through it necessarily. But we were able to get more, especially down in the gutter region, and provided what Reviel said. The reimaging allowed real progress with the stomachion, but reading more words of stomachion may be even more confused about its contents. So I think Mary was talking about all these baby steps, okay? And so good, I've got more information, but okay, what did he really mean here? So you can go to a new history of Greek mathematics, which Reviel published then based on this information. So we're not the first ones to try to read palimpsests. We happen to be among the earlier ones to do it digitally. It was done with film and with UV before our current or earlier photographic techniques. There were other techniques, and that was to apply a reagent to the parchment, as Cardinal Librarian May did in the Vatican in the early part of the 18th century. So you take this reagent, sometimes you'd do just keywords, sometimes, like Cardinal Librarian May, you would do entire pages, entire folio. So what you would do is you would apply this reagent, it would bring out, I forget what it was, but it would bring out the undertext. So it would darken it, and then you could quickly transcribe it. After 20 minutes or an hour, it would turn black like this. So this proved to be a real challenge, but thanks in particular to Bill's processing skills, I had schlepped the system into the Vatican, did the imaging. I'm 6 hours ahead of Bill. I'd send the images through the Vatican's very good communication systems off to Bill, 6 hours behind me. I could have fine Italian food and wine, and he would do the processing, and he does an amazing job because this is a lot better than that. And we also had teams of scholars there, and this interdisciplinary approach is important, to have the scholars saying, hey, I'm seeing this. Can you get this? What about this? Usually they end up saying, oh, and by the way, we have this, 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 and this as you're heading out the door there. So, but we had the scholars there. We were able to work with them on some of the interactive processing. It turns out this has excerpts from, excuse me, 14 different historians, including Polybius and Dexippus, in particular the Dexippus. Now remember, these are much earlier. These would have been written on papyrus, then ended up getting transcribed onto the parchment, then got overwritten at a later date for religious things. So the scholars said this gave important new results. We have published just recently last year in the Vatican Library Review, we published how we did this. And we think it's important to always, as with any scientific method, record success and record failure. If the dog does not bark, that's as important as, hey, we got these results. Now, we've been to the Vatican, turning to the other rite of Christianity, to the Eastern Rite, the monastery at Monastery of St. Catherine, the holy and God-trodden Mount of St. Catherine, home of what's said to be the burning bush, Greek Orthodox monastery. Monastic tradition established there in the 4th century. This basilica built in the 6th century under Emperor Justinian. bell towers much later. They had manuscripts in each of the monk cells. In the early part of the 18th century, the abbot started to collect those into a single library. Current librarian is Father Justin of the Sinai, and they now have a new library they built there. They have not only a trove of manuscripts, but also their original bindings. So there's a rich array of history here and of languages. And so we brought the systems in, and we're able to, some of these are fragments that were found in literally a hole in the wall. You go down in the wall, down a passage, and so they're fragments of some of these works called the new finds because they were found in 1975. And so the set up camera system and lights and able to take a fragment like this, where here's palimpsest undertext, and able to bring that out, the work of Roger Easton and Keith Knox and Bill Christiansberry, we're able to then bring this out. I should point out, we always do a grayscale. 1 in 12 men are colorblind, so that image sometimes proves very useful. All of these are now available online, sinaiLibrary.ucla.edu, Sinai Library. Wealth of languages here. Some Semitic languages. We've got Ethiopic. We have the Latin and the Greek, but also Syriac, the CPA, the Christian Palestinian Aramaic, and the Arabic, which brings to the fore that we think of our tradition. We think of, gone from the papyrus in Greek or Egypt. We then go to the parchment and throughout the Western Europe. But much the knowledge made its way through the Arab world, and that is how it was preserved in a period there. The Walters Art Museum has digitized their Islamic collection. Many other institutions and universities have done the same. And this was an important transition of knowledge from ancient Greece and Rome through the Arab world up to Spain and on back around to as we know it now. So that tradition is one that is important to digitize and important to study. And we found this in one of the languages of the area, Aramaic language, in the Syriac. And the Galenic tradition, the medical tradition of ancient Greece was passed down through a scholar named Galen. And his work was translated in many forms and passed down in Syriac. At this point, the owner of the Archimedes palimpsest, a private owner, said, hey, there's another palimpsest out there. Thought you'd be interested in this. So we disbound and imaged this. A great scholar, Sebastian Brock, great Syriacist, said, this is Galen's on simple drugs. And so we imaged that and made it all available. This individual, Gregory Kessel, who you may have read about recently because he's the one who recently was able to identify Matthew 11 and 12 that was found in a palimpsest in the Vatican. He just published that March 8th, I think. Brilliant scholar, and he had been up in Harvard at Houghton Library. He'd been examining this leaf that he has up on his computer, and I brought him to a library to see the Syriac Galen palimpsest. He said, I feel like I've held this before. And he compared it to the Houghton manuscript. And then he did a search, a catalog search, just good, solid catalog information. He didn't go around and look at all of these as he had at Houghton. He searched through the catalogs to identify those works that could be the Galen. And he came up with 3 leaves in the Vatican, in the VAV. 3 leaves or folios, I intermix those terms. 1 at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France in Paris. The Houghton one in St. Catherine's Monastery. and the private collection. So we imaged all those and, in effect, reunited this manuscript for the first time digitally. Again, hosted at University of Pennsylvania. And so we have, and one of the great accomplishments was not the imaging, in my mind, not the imaging, not the technology, but the openness of the institutions. Two of the three great bureaucracies of the world, the Roman Catholic Church with the Vatican, the Greek Orthodox Church with the monastery. We didn't have federal government involved, thank goodness. And so they gave permission to make all these freely available. So, and all the collected images and all the processed images. Interestingly enough, one of the folio at the Vatican says this, in Arabic, this, which is consigned to the monks of Mount Sinai. No one has authority to take it away from them. Yet they have one leaf, still left. So this is the leaf at St. Catherine's Monastery. That's Mike Phelps, head of the Early Manuscripts Electronic Library, who has been directing the overall imaging there. I was the program manager. So these are available now on OPEN. If you go to the Sinai Palimpsest project, you'll get the processed images only at Syriac New Finds 65, fragment 65. So we put all these data out there, and a scholar and some scholars in England thought this was worth studying. They got $1 million grant to study this. This made the front page of the science section in the New York Times. When does an old manuscript make that? And Peter Poorman in Manchester said, it's likely to be a central text once it's fully deciphered. Might discover things we really can't dream of yet. I'm waiting for the book that we all contribute chapters to be published, so stay tuned there. Scholarship moves much slower for me than program systems engineering and systems integration does. But we then did more imaging of this, where I had to go to the owner and say, hey, we want to define this. So we put all those data up at OPEN as well. So I couriered the object out to Stanford. We did multispectral imaging there, and we also did X-ray fluorescence there on two beam lines. So it was almost literally a 3-ring circus with a multispectral and 2 beam lines. And so we got more information that the scholars have been wading through. So questions as far as how we've gotten here thus far on, I don't know if there's any online, but any in the room. Is this making sense to you? Okay, all right. Or as one professor I know would say, is this amazing or what? So turning to another institution, much, much smaller institution, but doing amazing and very important work worldwide is the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library of Himmel with Columbus Stewart. They're working in many of the hotspots in the world, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Ukraine, trying to preserve information from communities, the heritage of those communities in textual form, digitizing, giving cameras to communities to digitize, and then preserving that digital information. Well, they had this fragment that had at first been identified as, I think, Albanian. It was really Georgian, ancient Georgian, not the stuff down above Florida. Georgian over some undertext there, and it proved to be a palimpsest. So he sent it down to Bill and me, and we imaged this, fragment 32. This is what a stack of images looks like. We end up with all these TIFF images. And then we were able to process it. It looks a lot better if you turn it right side up. So we were able, this is the overtext, and here's the undertext in yellow here, okay? And there's some areas that are kind of hard to read in there. So green overtext, yellow undertext. You can do all sorts of different colors, depends. Everyone has a preference there with a light blue versus the green or whatever. But you can see there's some gaps here that are, remember, this was scrubbed off. And sometimes some areas get scrubbed a little better than others, and they do a better job. And the Syriac manuscripts, they always put a calcium layer on it chalky layer, and that made it even harder. So working with David Calabro, here again, that interface with the scholar, the collaboration that's critical to be able to help refine the technology. He circled these areas and said, hey, I'm having a hard time reading them. So let's look at this one here. We did some processing, kept, pick your color, whatever, and we just could not get more of the undertext that was legible there. So what's the next step? Take it out to an X-ray synchrotron, see what we can get there. Now, normally you have to put in a peer-reviewed scientific proposal. This is just a single leaf. We didn't need a lot of beam time, so we tacked this on to some of the experimental imaging that Uwe Bergman, Nick Edwards, and Sam Webb were doing out there. And so, as you can see, we've gotten a lot better than the days the Archimedes palimpsest. There's not a lot of aluminum foil and stuff. The beam's coming out here. I think we were using a 50 micron pinhole. And then we've got a detector here, a detector there, and a detector back there. Yes, my badge is on my back. That's so that it doesn't flip down and hit the parchment and perhaps damage it or scrape some ink. And then we don't wear gloves, remember. So this is what we got, where we were able to get more of the undertext. Believe it or not, this is better. This is better not only because we could see more of the undertext, but we saw 2 layers of undertext. This is a double palimpsest. There are 3 layers of ink here. And so the scholars were able to identify the top is the 10th century Georgian. Then we have what we were seeing earlier, the 8th century Syriac. And then we have the 6th century Syriac underneath this. And so all of these data are also on OPEN. You see a trend here. So you can access these data and study this to your heart's content. It's important, as we noted, to preserve these data. So we provide information about the data so that anyone who goes in there, and we don't put this in Word document, we do it in a text form so that someone can read this years down the road and say, this is what this is. It turns out, based on a scholar who saw this, a scholar in Oslo, here again, digital, doesn't matter where you are in the world, said that this came from Georgian 49, which is one of the manuscripts in St. Catherine's Monastery. And it's from Georgian 49 that Matthew 11 and 12, that was just identified by Gregory Kessel, that was in the New York Times and all that, also from Georgian 49. So you have these multiple texts, and what the undertext is still being defined because it's very hard to read that undertext there. Gregory was working on that as well. So that's some of what happens with parchment and how we can find more information from it. Questions about parchment, papyrus? The ox stands heavy upon your tongue. Huh? So moving on to paper, we all learned, Johann Gutenberg in Mainz, 1554, produces this 42-line Bible with movable metal type. And so we were able to work with several copies of these. But what we did not learn is prior to that, in 1377, the earliest printed book is the Jikji from Korea. This is a replica copy of the Jikji. The original Jikji is going on exhibit in France. If any of you are in Paris, it's a rare opportunity. First time it's been on exhibit, I think, in 50 years. In part, maybe, because this is now the subject of study. So I'll pass around this replica copy. And so they use movable metal type to preserve the works of Buddha. And somewhat different form, but before, and we believe it was used before 1377. So a group in Utah started developing a program where we could compare the Eastern and Western texts, trying to identify similarities and differences between them. So we had a rare opportunity. We also imaged this annuals of spring and summer by Confucius. This is about, we believe, 1434, 1440. That's still being identified. What was unique was we could butt these two up next to each other, Gutenberg meet Korean text, and get an image of the two texts in the same frame. So we have the same lighting, the same camera, everything's the same. We're not trying to compare, although we always include this little color chart, which is a standard, so we can compare different images. But in this case, they're in the same image there, and so we could compare the different texts there. And you could do processing. Also, you could do qualitative study of the spectral response to not only understand the inks, but you can see the chain and laid lines in the paper. This is some early paper. This is, incunables, this is 1486, 1493. Please be careful with them. They're more fragile than the parchment, but still pretty solid. Laid paper. And so this is Western paper, I should point out. The Eastern would be mulberry. Here's a modern mulberry. I'll start over here. So comparing not only the papers, but the inks, the compositions of the inks. And so we had opportunity to do multispectral imaging. You can see some of the repairs and marks on these things. If anyone wants these data, I'm happy to share. Now with multispectral, sometimes you see paste downs where this is at Duke University. This was stuck on top of the page, so to see what is underneath it, the infrared works well. Signatures that get obscured. This is Vesalia's second edition, his key work on anatomy based on dissections. And so it helps us. Sometimes it doesn't always provide a clear view. It helps us to see previous signatures there. One area where advanced technology is helpful. Remember, we've said some of these things get lost, whether in papyrus form, in parchment form, or in paper form. And of course, two major areas of loss are fire and flood, or even just real high humidity in some cases. So one challenge we ran into, the oldest Orthodox parish in North America is in New Orleans, Holy Trinity. And their basement was flooded in Hurricane Katrina. And in that, their early records, their early sacramental records were in the basement. They were flooded, and then they got left there for several years. So then we had mold growth. Mold will eat away at paper, eat away at ink. So that's what that looked like. Pretty bad. We were able to recover some information, some of the text, and they said, oh yeah, this helps identify this priest or this congregant or whatever. But where there's mold, it tends to digest the ink. And the other thing is we had the wicking in the paper, so you end up with blobology, if you will, trying to figure out what that blob was because it is expanded through the paper. So we're able to get more information. Fire is another. This is the Anna Amalia Library in Weimar. Fire in 2004. They're just getting ready to move everything into a new fireproof storage area. Fire broke out, especially in the attic, where there were a lot of musical scores. The people of Weimar they had a chain. While the fire's burning above, people were moving stuff out down below to avoid the water damage too. So musical scores, I'm not a musicologist, but hearkening back to Jeff with his records, here we have a musical score that's burned and scorched. Now burned areas, pretty hard to get anything, but the scorched areas we could get more notes, which in music is equivalent to getting a few more words and tell the trends in the music. Sometimes people spill ink, like Ben Franklin's nephew when he was making a copy of his journal. So we were able to bring out the text under that. That's what Ben Franklin's writing looked like. This was for the Corps of Light Dragoons, some supplies there. Faded text, family had a warrant signed by a president, they said, and so we were able to bring out the U.S. grants. Also, you can see residues here from tape that had once been used to hold this together. So it's very important for conservation. Faded berry juice. In this case, 1871 field diary of Livingston, who's stuck in Africa. He's sick. He's basically been cut off. And so he's using berry juice to write on top of a London Standard newspaper and able to bring that text out. Because some of my art history professors may be listening in, also useful for artwork. This is, some believe could be an early Da Vinci, so trying to find some hidden lettering that may be in there. Michelangelo, this was a poem. He also had some things here we were trying to recover. But over on the side, there's this sketch, which was linked prior to our imaging to that leg on the wall of the Sistine Chapel. This Rubens, it's amazing. You know, we were talking about how little bits of information can take you down rabbit holes. We were imaging this in a location in Germany, and it was interesting. You know, the paints and then the colors and everything. But as I started to research this, in part for an art history class here at George Mason University, with the help of the art history professors and art history librarian, and with some information I got from others in Germany as far as catalog information. This took me down the rabbit hole of, was this looted by the Nazis? Was this sold at auction by a collaborator with the Nazis in Switzerland? The research is ongoing here, so you never know where the research, it's not in the technology of the processing and bringing out the paint, it's coming back to the provenance, which was questionable on this. We recently, just down the road from here, I mean, really just down the road, is historic Blenheim, there's Graffiti House in Culpeper, and able to get information for conservation. And this is the writing of the graffiti of the soldiers. Now, as Mills Kelly here at George Mason will know, we have a lot of information about the generals. They wrote their biographies, they have their diaries. We have little information about the soldiers. And they would write on the walls, sometimes in German, some were of German descent, sometimes in English. They would make drawings. So we were trying to see what we could bring out underneath paint, which was very difficult with multispectral imaging. But we ended up, during COVID, this was a project we took on. So we now have all these data here at George Mason, which are available. The historic Blenheim, with their one historic preservationist, has been swamped with these data. And we just got an NEH grant. George Mason got an NEH grant to look at digitizing, none of the multispectral or anything, but converting to digital all the information on these walls. And a big part of the challenge is the metadata. And how are we going to control that? How are we going to preserve and maintain and share that information? Now, I said, here's a chance at $1 million for those of you who are into technology. These are not something a dog left on a lawn. They're about this big, and they are carbonized papyrus scrolls from Herculaneum. And the ash covered them, turned them to ash, but also helped preserve them. There is a prize, and the data that is available online has this type of information from the X-ray computer tomography. And there's a prize. You go to scrollprize.org. Grand prize of $700,000 for the first team to read a scroll by December 31st of this year, and first to detect ink in a scroll by June 14th. 14th. So you better get going. This is not a challenge of reading Greek. It is not a challenge of trying to understand the papyrus. It's a software challenge, really. It's an artificial intelligence challenge. So if someone out there feels they have processes or technology to work on this, and you want to get a little extra money over the summer, this is something you might look at. So there's the website has all, you can then download the data, you have to sign away various agreements. Machine learning and artificial intelligence is really the future. And I think if we look at what George Mason is doing with artificial intelligence, with forensic science, with computer science and some computer technologies, there's opportunities here to advance cultural heritage. Not the imaging, but just take all the data that are out there. Remember, I said there's a lot of it at OPEN. Some of the Archimedes palimpsest data, we said there's these identified leaves. All those data are out there. You could take something like this and try to teach the system to identify a line of text, to identify this partial Greek letter has a good chance of being a pi or a theta or whatever by teaching the system. There's transcriptions out there too. Alexander of Aphrodisias, and that text, I was just over, is the same Nigel Wilson, we first worked together 20 years ago, working with Tony Richards and Christina Nagu at Christ Church in Oxford, also a model for Harry Potter's Hogwarts, Christ Church, that is. And so we were putting up some palimpsests that we had imaged in Christ Church 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, something like that, 2 weeks ago. And Nigel and I were chatting. He said, there's got to be more we can do with the Archimedes palimpsest. There's, this commentary on Aristotle. There's the unknown text. I said, well, maybe there's something that can be done with artificial intelligence with the current data. Before we start going to, let's use a 100 megapixel camera, let's take them out of their sleeves again and everything. So maybe there's something we can do. These data are all out there. They're all available. You don't necessarily have, you need to be able to identify Greek, but then to train the system to at least identify, okay, this is a line of text, this is a line of text. So there's a lot that can be done, even with institutions that may not have deep libraries, may not have a broad range of language skills, but have the technical skills and can contribute to the humanities and to our cultural heritage. It takes people, it takes teams of people, it takes people working together, and if we're going to make these data into information that can be passed on to future generations, it's how we work together, how we apply the technology as teams. I've been fortunate to work with some great people all around the world. Looking forward to our program here at George Mason with the NEH, and that was the first level of the grant. We're meeting again for the next level of the grant. So who knows, maybe there will be more, be talking with Mills and the center there. So I thank you very much, especially in such a warm room as this, for those of you who are here in person. I would like my objects back. Well, I see they're all over safe in the corner there. But thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Follow up on the 2nd of May, the search in Smithsonian Associates. Questions?
I just wanted to say thank you so very much, and I'm sure you're happy to answer any questions that
Yes.
there are. And I'm also here to pass the microphone to you. Yeah.
Do we need that
Yeah,
for
it's
the
because
computer?
a lot of people are on
Okay.
YouTube, and I don't know if it's better.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating. So I'm curious about materials that might be a bit more dense. Most of these were organic. Do you think that this could have any effectiveness on multiple layers of painted plaster? And also, do you think any of these surface techniques could maybe potentially identify very, very faint stone carving, like inscriptions?
Okay, there's two questions. One is through a surfactant of
Yeah.
some type. And second is some type of impression.
Yeah.
So, and there's multiple technologies out there. Through a surfactant, if it's very thin, as you saw with thin layer of gesso, in particular the infrared will penetrate. Those longer wavelengths will penetrate the surface layers sometimes. There's different methods of doing that. You could just use the light, or you could go to tomography type thing. One would be to use a handheld tomography, coherent tomography, just to see, is there something there? And then you go to something else. If it's carbon, there's no way you can get it with X-ray. That's too light of an element to get with X-rays. Perhaps in future, terahertz imaging used for bomb detection, that type of thing, may work. I think that's between microwave and infrared. So it's questionable. It depends how thick. That's what we were hoping to do with the Civil War houses and sometimes in the IR, but it depends how thick they are. Second question, if you have a 3D indentation there. So that's where best thing, first of all, is raking light, where you take a picture with a light at a very low oblique angle. There's also reflectance coherence tomography. No, I got that wrong. Polynomial textual mapping and RTI reflectance, something imaging.
Yeah, we've done some RTI on artifacts, but we've consistently struggled with these stone surfaces that are outdoors.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can't control the light in photography.
Laser may be your best bet.
Yeah, that's we've just recently gotten the iPad that has the LiDAR scanner, and so we're experimenting with that.
Yeah, no, I think that would be your best bet, where you're trying to get microscopic almost to within a few microns of density. Then the problem, of course, is the lighter it is, you're also going to get other scrapings and serrations. So with both of those, then the other challenge is the processing. You end up with all these data, and how can you sort the signal from the noise? So let's chat further. Okay. Other questions? No? Yes.
How chemically stable are the inks? Or are there certain changes you know to look for over time, or in case of water damage or something like that?
Okay, how chemically stable are the inks? We're dealing here primarily with two inks. One is the iron gall ink, which is very stable, and especially on the parchment, it's almost like a tattoo on the skin. So it has become embedded with the collagen in the skin. The carbon is less stable, and that's where you have to be particularly careful with the energy levels. You don't want to create more fading, although I dare say having something set out under these lights as opposed to a dark room, and then you have the small amounts of light, there's more damage here. So there is some risk to the carbon inks. Colorants and pigments, very high risk. Those are frequently not stable, and there've been large research studies done into what did Von Hoek originally, what was the original color of a sunflower. So it varies with the chemical makeup. The inks themselves, fairly stable, very much so for the iron gall, less so for carbon. We're also working on sepia ink from cuttlefish. So we've done some research. That's one reason I was up at Himmel most recently, the Hill Museum Manuscript Library most recently, looking at squid ink, which does fade. Other questions? Alex?
Do you work on any Native American sites in the Western Hemisphere?
I haven't worked in any Native American sites. I would be interested in both Native American sites and early slave sites. Those are two, I think, that may offer potential. Native American, you have petroglyphs for one. Those, of course, are carvings, but you also have some of the early, whatever dyes or inks on walls or on surfaces. Probably have to do some of that at night. Civil slave sites, because you may have layers of smoke And underneath that carbon, there could be other things that you're able to see. So those are two I'm interested in. So if anyone knows of one, let me know. There's a question here too.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to thank you because this was fascinating. I was trying to capture everything that you said. A lot of technical things were not my forte, but I mean, it must be really gratifying what you do. And thank you for doing this contribution into the humanity because your work is definitely unbelievable and so helpful. You were talking about Heraclinium. I was there a couple of summers ago, and it's such a romantic site. And I always wondered, what was left behind and to touch. And thank you so much for bringing the scrolls. I always look at museums at all the scrolls and manuscripts, and I was like, I really would love to touch it in my hand. And when you were passing it around, I was like, yes, my dream came true. I'm holding one in my hand. So thank you so much. It's really, really fascinating work that you do.
Well, it's my pleasure. And to some extent, I started studying science, switched to history, back to engineering, then in science. So I've come full circle. But that's where I feel a university like George Mason offers potential as long as there continues to be the funding for the humanities, for the languages, for the classics, so that even if it's just at an initial level, people who are working in the technology, in the sciences, same with the art history, use it too, so that they have that background in their core courses that will then enable them or interest them in applying what they learn on the technical side in the STEM and apply that to the humanities. So I think it's important that we continue this interdisciplinary approach to the humanities and to the sciences.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would like to echo that. And what you just said, like, it is really, really interdisciplinary work. You need all the disciplines to achieve what you're doing. And I also was thinking, like, it sounds like every project you work on brings new discoveries. Is that really how it goes, or are there also very...
Sometimes some of the discoveries are rather slow, I might say, that you leave a place and you end up with the problem is you have all these data. You have huge amounts of data. I have 8 terabytes in the desk on my desk. And you got to back that up and everything. And then you give that to an institution such as Historic Blenheim. And what do they do with all these data? And or Graffiti House out in Culpeper, or Himmel can deal with it. But anyway, you can get overloaded with that, and that's where good data management and making it available. How do we preserve those data are a key question. And that's why just putting it out there and making it freely available, people will copy it, people will use it. And that will, if the OPEN and all their backups go down, people who have copied it, I think there's some in Dubai and elsewhere have copied it, there will be other sources of that data. So when the Library of Alexander failed, and wasn't necessarily one great bonfire, when that failed, and some information had been dispersed, and that information was then preserved. So what's going to happen with our digital data, dispersing it, and by making it freely available, I think is critically important.
Thank you so much for doing that. Any other questions?
I just wanted to piggyback on what Lena and Francine said. And in the name of the Modern Classical Languages Department, we would like you to have this really small token of our appreciation for your talk. And maybe you can wear it proudly in your adventures around the world and represent.
For out in the desert, and this is not that small a token either. It's going to fit me. Oh, wonderful. Now I'll show up in class with something more appropriate. Thank you so very much.
And there's just a little something in there for your coffee or.
Yes, I saw you.
Be careful not to spill it on any of the manuscripts or
Right.
any of the
Yes. That's why I usually don't carry a pen either. Always a pencil. So thank you so much. This is wonderful.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. This is great. Yes.
I had hats off to you all. Over to you.
Yeah, I don't know if there are any more questions. Vivek, do I understand that we cannot have online questions, right? Or are we?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're not missing any there.
My email's there, mtote6@gmu.edu.
Ah, okay. So people can send an email if they have a question.
Sure.
Yeah. So if there are no more questions, then well, thank you so much for these fascinating insights into your work and for coming here and sharing all that with us. Thank you so much. Yeah.
And please have some
And
snacks.
please, we have fruits, we have water, which is probably nice now, warm room, and take some home because we don't want to waste food and have to throw it away. Thank you so much.
Warm room, end of a long day. Don't work out.
Well, plus